Welcome to Ancient Forbidden Knowledge. I'm your host, Ben Carter. And in today's episode, we journey into the depths of a myth older than civilization itself, one told on every continent, in every ancient tongue, across cultures that supposedly never met. The Great Flood. A cataclysm so vast, it left only fragments in scripture, stone and whispered legend. But what if it wasn't just a story? What if the flood wasn't punishment for sin or divine wrath, but a reset, triggered by a force no ancient priest dared name? And if so, what were they trying to wash away, and who made sure we forgot it? In the cradle of civilization, where the Tigris and Euphrates once nursed the great Sumerian cities, a story was etched into clay over 4,000 years ago. Long before the book of Genesis was written, the Epic of Gilgamesh described a flood so massive it swallowed the world. In the tale, the gods decide humanity has grown too loud, too unruly. They summon a deluge to erase their creation. But one man, Utnapishtim, is warned in secret. He builds a great boat, gathers animals and kin, and survives the storm. When the waters subside, he releases birds to find land and offers a sacrifice to the gods. It's a tale mirrored eerily in the Hebrew Bible, in Greek mythology, in Hindu texts, even in Mesoamerican legend. But these parallels don't just suggest cultural borrowing. They hint at something deeper, a shared memory encoded into humanity's oldest stories. At the core of each version, there are common elements: massive floods, divine or celestial warnings, chosen survivors, and a rebirth of civilization. In ancient India, the Matsya Purana tells of Manu, a man warned by a fish that the earth would be submerged. Instructed to build an ark, Manu survives and becomes the progenitor of a renewed human race. In Greek lore, Deucalion and Pyrrha ride out Zeus's watery wrath in a chest, landing on Mount Parnassus to repopulate a cleansed earth. The Aztecs speak of Tata and Nini, spared by the gods in a hollowed-out cypress. The Polynesians, the Chinese, the Aboriginal Australians, each culture remembers a time when the sea rose and everything was lost. But where was this universal flood? Geological records don't support a single global deluge wiping out all life simultaneously. However, between 12,000 and 11,000 years ago, at the end of the Younger Dryas, a sudden, severe return to glacial conditions, something extraordinary did happen. Massive ice sheets collapsed, sea levels rose hundreds of feet, vast stretches of land vanished beneath the oceans. The Black Sea flooded with salt water from the Mediterranean in a cataclysmic rush. Coastal cities, if they existed, would have been swallowed without a trace. Many scholars now believe that these myths are distorted recollections of real, localized floods, tales passed down orally until they were finally committed to writing in religious texts and mythologies. But there's a problem with that explanation. The myths aren't vague, they're eerily precise. The boats are often described with advanced measurements. The warnings are sometimes said to come from stars or sky beings, and always there is the implication that the flood was not a random act of nature, but a targeted event, a deliberate cleansing. The Sumerians did not describe their gods as omnipotent spirits. They were flesh and blood beings, advanced, immortal, and terrifying. The Anunnaki, as they were called, did not merely unleash the flood out of anger. They convened, debated, and decided it was necessary. And when it was over, they regretted it. They descended to smell the sacrifice Utnapishtim made. They repopulated the world with survivors. The message is clear. Something had gone terribly wrong. The flood was a solution. The ancient priests of Egypt hinted at a similar rupture in the time before time, a moment when the gods walked among men and decided to reset the world. In their version, it was not water alone, but fire and chaos that followed. The land of Zep Tepi, the first time, was destroyed to make way for the dynasties we now call ancient. So where were these original humans? What knowledge did they have that needed to be erased? And what, or who, decided they were too dangerous to continue? The ancient flood myths may not be religious metaphors, but encoded memories of a species-wide amnesia, one imposed from above. In the early 20th century, on the banks of the Euphrates in southern Iraq, British archaeologist Leonard Woolley made a discovery that would shake the foundations of biblical and Sumerian scholarship alike. While excavating the ancient city of he encountered a layer of sterile, water-laid clay over 10 feet thick. Beneath it were the remnants of pre-flood settlements. Above it, evidence of a completely different era. Woolley claimed this was physical proof of the Great Flood. The layer was sudden, deep, and had no gradual build-up. Mainstream scholars, however, quickly moved to frame it as a local flood event. It was easier to compartmentalize it that way, less threatening to the grand narrative of human development. But Woolley's discovery wasn't isolated. Similar flood layers, thick bands of silt and clay with no signs of habitation, have been found at Shuruppak, Kish, and other early Mesopotamian cities. Some of these sites date back to the so-called Ubaid period, a prehistoric era of mysterious temple-building cultures that emerged almost out of nowhere. The official view is that these were independent riverine floods, seasonal and destructive. But that doesn't explain the sudden technological shifts and breaks in cultural continuity found directly above those layers. Something didn't just wash away mud brick homes, it erased entire civilizations. In 1995, a marine geologist named William Ryan put forth a theory that stunned the academic world. He proposed that the Black Sea had once been a freshwater lake, and that around 5600 BCE, rising Mediterranean waters breached a natural dam at the Bosporus Strait. In a matter of weeks, salt water would have rushed in with the force of 200 Niagara Falls, flooding over 60,000 square miles of land. This wasn't a slow change. It was a cataclysm. Villages, farms, and possibly entire cities would have disappeared beneath the onslaught, never to be seen again. For the people who survived, it would have felt like the end of the world. Around the same time, off the coast of India, sonar scans near the Gulf of Kambat revealed what appeared to be submerged ruins, grids of stone structures stretching across the sea floor. The discovery caused a media stir. Some claimed it was a sunken city older than any known civilization. Mainstream archaeologists dismissed it, citing natural rock formations and inconclusive dating methods. The Indian government swiftly ended further exploration, citing bureaucratic obstacles. The findings were shelved. The site was never excavated. More recently, off the coast of Cuba, in the deep waters of the Yucatan Channel, Canadian researchers using deep-sea sonar uncovered symmetrical stone structures nearly 2,000 feet below the surface. Engineers and marine geologists who reviewed the data were stunned. These weren't random boulders. They showed patterns, angles, and alignments suggestive of artificial origin. Yet the academic world responded with silence. The implications were too enormous. If confirmed, these sites would rewrite everything about the origins of civilization. These discoveries, scattered, controversial, and often buried under politics, point toward a disturbing pattern. Again and again, evidence emerges that suggests there was something before what we call history. Not just tribes or wandering herders, but structured societies, cities, and possibly even technologies we can't explain. And just as often that evidence disappears, whether by disinterest, suppression, or fear. The story of the Great Flood isn't one of metaphor. It is the buried memory of an extinction-level event, one that erased a version of humanity the victors didn't want remembered. Scattered among the ruins and whispers of the ancient world are fragments, pieces of evidence that don't fit into the accepted timeline, that refuse to conform to the linear evolution model we've been taught. These anomalies aren't just archaeological curiosities. They are clues to a larger truth, one that's been quietly pushed to the margins. At the heart of it is the question no one dares ask aloud. What if civilization did not begin 6,000 years ago, but was rebooted? At Lake Titicaca in the high Andes, one of the oldest human-inhabited regions on Earth, lies the enigmatic site of Tiwanaku. While mainstream archaeology places its major structures around 1,500 years ago, local legends speak of much older origins, of a civilization that thrived long before the Inca, before even the rise of the Amazonian tribes. Stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons are scattered across the site, cut with such precision that even modern engineers question how they were shaped. These blocks appear to have been shattered by a great force, scorched, displaced, and left in disarray. The flood stories of the Andes speak of a deluge sent by the gods to destroy a corrupt race of giants. But why would that myth appear here, thousands of miles from Mesopotamia, with such striking similarity? In Egypt, beneath the paws of the Sphinx, Seismic surveys in the 1990s detected anomalies, rectangular chambers deep underground, untouched by the tools of modern archaeology. Egyptologist Dr. Zahi Hawass initially confirmed their existence, only to later deny any access when speculation erupted over what might lie below. Author John Anthony West and geologist Robert Schoch suggested the Sphinx itself bears water erosion marks inconsistent with the desert climate of the last 5,000 years. Instead, the patterns matched thousands of years of heavy rainfall Egypt hasn't seen since before the Sahara became desert. This would date the Sphinx not to the dynastic period, but to a time lost even to the pharaohs. A time when the flood myths may have still been fresh memory. In China's Loess Plateau, the Xia dynasty flood myth was long considered legend, until 2016, when researchers uncovered evidence of a massive landslide dam that burst around 1920 BCE, causing a flood so violent it altered the course of the Yellow River. The implications were clear. Stories once thought to be myths were grounded in catastrophic, civilization-altering reality. But once again, the story was boxed into regional significance, separated from its global parallels. Then there are the OOPArts, out-of-place artifacts, objects that defy the historical context in which they're found. Metallic spheres embedded in 2.8 billion-year-old rock in South Africa. The Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek device with gears so precise it resembles a 19th-century clock. A hammer encased in a 400-million-year-old stone nodule. These anomalies are dismissed, ridiculed, or stored away. They don't fit the narrative. But they speak of knowledge and of eras that came and went, wiped clean by forces still unknown. Satellite imagery of the Amazon has revealed massive geometric earthworks, laid out with impossible precision, buried beneath centuries of jungle overgrowth. These aren't tribal camps, they are remnants of a vanished culture, a forgotten city-building civilization. As the rainforest thins, more of these structures are emerging. And with them, the undeniable truth. Humanity's past is more layered than we've been led to believe. When all of these clues are viewed together, they begin to form a pattern, a global scar running through the memory of our species. A scar left by a great rupture, a planetary catastrophe that reset the clock. The flood myths, far from being mere tales, may be cultural trauma responses, encoded warnings from a civilization that saw the end firsthand. Their echoes are still with us. But the story they tell is not of divine punishment. It is of something far more deliberate. From the ice-covered reaches of Siberia to the rainforests of the Amazon, from ancient Babylonian ziggurats to the stepped pyramids of Mesoamerica, a striking pattern emerges, one that transcends borders, languages, and belief systems. Civilizations that allegedly had no contact with one another shared not only a story of a great flood, but astonishingly similar symbols, rituals, and architectural forms. This is not coincidence. It is the fingerprint of a lost knowledge system, one fragmented by time, but too widespread and consistent to dismiss. In Mesoamerica, the Mayan Popol Vuh tells of multiple creations and destructions of mankind. In one version, the gods create humans out of wood, but these beings are soulless and forget their creators. The gods respond with fury, unleashing a flood to wipe the failed race from the earth. The survivors are few and punished, scattered into different lands and languages. Across the ocean, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, a similar theme unfolds, humanity growing proud, drawing the ire of higher powers, followed by a cataclysm and a scattering. Even in the Maori legends of New Zealand, there is a tale of Tu Te Wehi Wehi and the flood that separated the heavens and the earth, ushering in a new order of being. The resonance is undeniable. The symbols persist as well. The spiral, found carved into rocks in Ireland, New Mexico, and Polynesia, represents cycles, time, and water, themes central to flood myths. The serpent, often associated with knowledge, chaos, or divine retribution, appears in nearly every culture. The feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, the Naga in India and Southeast Asia, the rainbow serpent of Aboriginal lore, and the great dragon of Chinese myth. Often the serpent is involved in bringing about the flood or surviving it. Then there are the pyramids. Whether the stepped pyramids of Saqqara, the flat-topped ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the towering limestone structures of Giza, or the jungle-cloaked temples of the Maya, the pyramid appears globally despite no supposed contact between these ancient peoples. They align with celestial bodies, encode mathematical ratios, and resist the erosion of millennia. In some traditions, these structures are described not as tombs, but as stabilizers, anchors against cosmic upheaval. Could they have served as monuments to a forgotten science, one designed to preserve knowledge through planetary cycles of destruction? Another cross-cultural pattern emerges in the aftermath of the flood myths. Always there is a teacher, a bringer of knowledge who guides the survivors into a new age. In Mesoamerican tradition, it is Quetzalcoatl who teaches agriculture, astronomy, and laws. In Mesopotamia, it is Oannes, a half-man, half-fish being who rises from the sea to instruct humanity. In Egypt, it is Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom. In India, the Matsya avatar of Vishnu returns to guide Manu into the new world. These are not coincidental parallels. They are cultural echoes of a singular archetype, an entity or force tasked with restoring balance after a world-resetting event. Even the language of the flood carries hidden meaning. The Hebrew word for the flood, Mabul, is used only to describe the Great Flood, not any ordinary deluge. In Sumerian, the term Abubu implies a storm of cosmic origin, not earthly rain. These weren't just floods. They were described as forces that altered the fabric of reality, breaking the connection between heaven and earth. Taken together, the myths, symbols, structures, and archetypes form a global puzzle. Each piece by itself may be explained away, but the totality cannot. Something, or someone, spread a blueprint across the early Earth, a symbolic and technological system that warned of destruction, guided survival, and laid the foundation for what came next. Its remnants still haunt our ruins, our religions, and our dreams, and beneath them all lies the same unspoken question: who built the original template, and what knowledge was lost when the waters came? Within the halls of academia, the flood myths have long been relegated to allegory, useful for understanding ancient psychology, perhaps, but never considered evidence of real events. Scholars have clung tightly to the framework of gradual development, linear progress, and isolated cultural evolution. The idea of a global civilization, or a coordinated ancient memory stretching across continents, is dismissed not with rebuttal, but with silence. The gatekeepers don't argue the evidence, they simply refuse to look at it. Funding is the first wall. Archaeological grants rarely go to projects that challenge mainstream timelines, propose a dig that supports the accepted narrative, and support flows. Suggest exploring a submerged city that predates known civilizations, and bureaucratic hurdles emerge. In academia, challenging foundational assumptions means risking your career. Young researchers are warned. Do not question the model. The story is already written. Peer review, designed to ensure quality, has become a mechanism of control. Radical findings are stalled, rejected, or endlessly delayed, not because of poor methodology, but because they threaten consensus. When a geologist proposes that the erosion patterns on the Sphinx predate dynastic Egypt, he's met not with debate, but ridicule. When underwater archaeologists present sonar images of symmetrical ruins beneath the sea, the conversation stops at natural formations. The system is designed to maintain intellectual order, not to discover forgotten truths. Textbooks reflect the same rigidity. Generations of students learn a curated version of history, one that begins with Sumer, peaks in Greece, and finds its perfection in the modern West. The idea that other civilizations may have risen and fallen before the official dawn of history is not part of the syllabus. The flood myths are reduced to moral tales, stripped of their historical weight. Their purpose is to teach obedience or humility, not to preserve memory. Institutions like the Smithsonian have been accused, often by independent researchers and indigenous communities, of hiding or destroying artifacts that challenge the prevailing timeline. Reports of giant human skeletons unearthed across North America in the 19th and early 20th centuries were catalogued and vanished. Stone tools and constructions found in geological layers that should be too old for humans are quietly removed from museum exhibits. These are not wild claims. They're documented events buried beneath layers of academic dismissal. Even language becomes a weapon. Terms like pseudo-archaeology, conspiracy theory, and fringe science are used not to describe the evidence, but to discredit the questioner. It is not what you find, it's who you are when you find it. Credentials become shields and truth becomes political. The deeper a theory cuts, the faster it's silenced. But the resistance is not always malicious. There is fear, real fear of what it would mean if these ancient stories were true. If a great flood did reset human civilization, if there was knowledge that predated the written word, if the myths were memories, not metaphors, then everything would change. The origins of humanity, the rise of culture, even the role of religion and science would need to be rewritten. So instead, the gate stays shut. The flood remains a parable, the ruins remain unexplored, and those who speak of a forgotten epoch are labelled as fantasists or worse. Yet the cracks in the foundation grow wider. More anomalies surface. More voices speak out. The wall of silence is beginning to tremble, not because the institutions are changing, but because the evidence no longer needs their permission to be seen. It only needs to be remembered. Among those not bound by institutional dogma, a different story has emerged, one that doesn't dismiss the flood myths, but takes them at face value. Fringe researchers, independent scholars, and ancient traditions all converge around a chilling hypothesis: that the Great Flood was not a freak event of nature, nor a moral punishment from the heavens, but the consequence of something far more advanced, something technological, intelligent, and possibly extraterrestrial. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki, powerful beings from the heavens who engineered humanity itself. According to the Babylonian text Atrahasis, it was the Anunnaki who decided to unleash the flood, not because of sin, but because humans had multiplied too quickly, becoming loud and uncontrollable. The decision wasn't moral, it was administrative. The flood was a reset switch. But the story goes deeper. The god Enki, sympathetic to humans, warned Atrahasis and instructed him to build a vessel to preserve life. What's striking isn't the divine nature of the Anunnaki, it's how bureaucratic, even calculated their actions appear. They act less like gods and more like scientists overseeing a failed experiment. In India, the Mahabharata and the Puranas describe advanced flying machines called vimanas, weapons that resemble nuclear bombs, and celestial beings engaging in warfare over the earth. If these texts are not mythology, but distorted records of ancient events, then the flood could have been a last resort, an engineered catastrophe meant to erase the evidence of technological warfare or a rogue civilization that had spiraled out of control. Some researchers believe that the destruction wasn't caused by rain alone, but by a weapon or energy field capable of destabilizing the Earth's climate. The sudden melting of ice sheets at the end of the Younger Dryas, the rise in sea levels, and the extinction of numerous megafauna all point to a cataclysm of immense power. In this view, the flood was a side effect of something larger, a geophysical disruption, possibly triggered intentionally to remove a threat or reset an ecosystem. Even more radical are the theories involving external intelligences, interdimensional beings, ancient artificial intelligences, or cosmic custodians who intervene at turning points in planetary development. The flood becomes less a punishment and more a scheduled purge, a programmed correction to steer Earth's biosphere or consciousness away from a dangerous trajectory. These ideas are not based on fantasy, but on the curious fact that many flood myths involve warnings from the sky, strange celestial omens, or beings descending from above to guide or destroy. Carl Jung believed that myths are expressions of the collective unconscious, shared memories encoded in archetypes. But what if these archetypes are not psychological, but historical? What if the gods remembered in legend were real entities, misunderstood by ancient peoples, misrecorded by later scribes, and buried by modern institutions? The presence of identical flood motifs, sky warnings, and knowledge bringers across continents suggests more than coincidence. It suggests contact with something vastly older and more powerful than humanity. In the 20th century, thinkers like Zecharia Sitchin, Graham Hancock, and Immanuel Velikovsky challenged the consensus with alternative histories rooted in these possibilities. They were mocked, marginalized, and sometimes discredited. But as technology has advanced and more of Earth's secrets have come to light, from submerged cities to cosmic anomalies, their questions have become harder to ignore. If the flood was indeed engineered, whether by ancient humans, gods, or other intelligences, then we are not the first civilization to rise to global prominence, and we may not be the first to fall. The ruins buried beneath our oceans, the myths passed down through fire and stone, and the symbols etched into every forgotten corner of the earth may be warning signs, left behind not just to record a past catastrophe, but to prevent the next one. To understand who might have orchestrated such a deliberate erasure of history, we must examine not just the event itself, but those who gained from the silence that followed. If the flood marked the end of an advanced age, of knowledge, structures, and beings that defy our historical understanding, then what replaced it was not merely a new civilization, but a controlled narrative. The victors weren't just the survivors, they were the architects of forgetting. In nearly every ancient culture, we find a mysterious transitional period following the flood myth, a time when knowledge was selectively reintroduced. Writing, agriculture, astronomy, all appear suddenly, as if granted rather than discovered. In Sumer, the kingship was said to descend from heaven after the flood. In Egypt, Thoth re-established the laws and sciences. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl returned to teach the survivors. These figures weren't just cultural heroes, they were agents of reprogramming. The question is, were they restoring lost knowledge or rewriting it? If the flood was used to wipe the slate clean, then those who emerged with the power to shape new civilizations became the gatekeepers of human destiny. Priesthoods, divine rulers, and god-kings appear in the aftermath, claiming descent from celestial beings or knowledge received from the gods. These institutions were not democratic. They operated through secrecy, ritual, and hierarchy. What little remained of the pre-flood world was encoded in symbols, myths, and stone, accessible only to the initiated. The rest of humanity was left in the dark. Across the ancient world, mystery schools and esoteric traditions arose that claimed to possess fragments of this forbidden knowledge. The Hermetic texts of Egypt, the Vedas of India, the Gnostic Gospels of early Christianity all allude to a hidden truth passed down from an earlier age. This knowledge was not just spiritual. It involved astronomy, alchemy, sacred geometry, and the manipulation of consciousness. But it was never shared freely. It was guarded, concealed beneath layers of allegory, and often destroyed when it threatened the existing power structure. Religious institutions eventually became the custodians of these fragmented truths. But as political empires grew, those same institutions began to suppress what didn't serve their authority. The Vatican sealed away ancient texts in its archives. Islamic caliphates razed libraries like Alexandria and Nalanda. Colonial powers looted and buried indigenous oral histories. Over and over, knowledge that didn't align with the new order was purged. Even in modern times, the pattern holds. Governments and corporate entities fund archaeological projects selectively, promote certain findings and dismiss others. When discoveries emerge that suggest a timeline far older than accepted, whether it's tools found deep in the Amazon, sunken ruins off Japan, or ancient maps showing Antarctica ice-free, they are either ignored or attacked. The goal is not to explore, but to control the story, because the story is power. If humanity understood it had risen before and been brought low not by accident but by design, it would demand to know who pulled the strings. If we remembered the capabilities of our ancestors, we might question the limits imposed on us today. And if we knew that knowledge could be used to control, manipulate, or even reset civilizations, we would begin to look very differently at those who present themselves as guardians of truth. Those who benefit from the lie are those who fear a world awakened. A world where people understand that history is not a linear ascent from primitive man to modern mastery, but a cycle of rise, fall, and rebirth. And those who remember the flood know that the most dangerous truth of all is not that it happened, but that it can happen again. If the Great Flood was not a myth, not a natural disaster, but a deliberate act, then the implications ripple far beyond the ancient world. They stretch into the very framework of what it means to be human. Every flood myth carries within it a deeper message, that knowledge was once widespread, powerful, and accessible, but it was deemed too dangerous. So it was washed away, not just by water, but by enforced amnesia. The survivors were not merely people who endured the flood. They were subjects of a new order, rebuilt atop the ruins of a forgotten world. The post-flood civilizations, Sumer, Egypt, Indus, Olmec, rose swiftly and with inexplicable sophistication. Writing systems appeared nearly fully formed. Monumental architecture emerged without evolutionary precedent. Astronomical knowledge, precise to degrees of arc, guided construction. These cultures all claimed their wisdom came from the gods, or from survivors of a prior age. If the flood had reset humanity, it didn't erase everything. It created the conditions for controlled reintroduction. Now imagine a world where the reset never happened. Imagine a timeline where that knowledge wasn't hidden in stone chambers or encoded in religious metaphor, but handed down, openly and without fear. Where the wisdom of Zep Tepi, of pre-flood Sumer, of sunken cities beneath the sea, continued to evolve. We might not be climbing toward space. We might already have left it behind. We might not be exploring consciousness with instruments. We might be shaping reality with thought. The ancient stories hint that these were not dreams, but memories. In such a world, religions might never have risen as institutions of control, because spiritual knowledge would be universal. Governments might never have monopolized power, because the truths of history would prevent the manipulation of fear. The sciences, the arts, even language itself, uninterrupted by catastrophe and censorship, would likely have advanced beyond recognition. Humanity might not be fractured by borders or belief systems. We might remember that we are the legacy of something greater, something whole. Instead, we live in the aftermath of a strategic forgetting. Our history begins with struggle and survival, not wisdom and abundance. Our myths are viewed as fiction. Our ancestors are seen as primitives. The technologies we rediscover, wireless energy, harmonic resonance, advanced metallurgy, are treated as breakthroughs, not recoveries. And yet beneath this imposed narrative something stirs, a recognition, however faint, that we have been here before. This recognition manifests in dreams, in déjà vu, in the global fascination with ancient sites we barely understand. It fuels the curiosity of those who wander into forbidden ruins, who question academic orthodoxy, who read the old myths not as allegory, but as encrypted history. It is the instinct that pulls us toward the stars, even as we forget why we ever looked up. It is the quiet truth behind our most persistent existential question. Where did we come from? Because if the flood erased a world where humanity was once connected to something higher, call it divine, extraterrestrial, or simply wiser, then we are not evolving toward our destiny. We are recovering from our trauma. The trauma of losing everything. The trauma of being cut off from a deeper reality. And though the waters receded, the silence they left behind has never fully lifted. To accept that the flood was real, that it was global, and that it was engineered, is to accept that our current civilization is not the first, nor the greatest. It is a fragile echo of something far more advanced, more aware, and more complete. That truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. It demands not just a rethinking of history, but a reawakening of memory. In every ancient flood myth, there is one lingering motif that refuses to fade. The memory of a time before, a golden age, a first civilization, a paradise lost. The flood may have swept away the cities, the temples, and the written words, but it could not fully erase what was encoded into human memory. It left behind more than ruins. It left behind the haunting sensation that something vital was taken. That we are living in the shadow of something far older and far more profound than we've been told. The survivors of the flood weren't just carrying food or livestock. They were carrying fragments of a lost world, stories, symbols, rituals, technologies. Some of these fragments became religion, others became legend. But a few were hidden, guarded by secret societies, buried beneath cathedrals and ziggurats, woven into the design of sacred geometry. Over millennia, these pieces were passed through the hands of alchemists, monks, sages, and explorers who each understood that what was forgotten could someday be remembered. And now the remnants are rising. The ice melts, the jungles thin. Satellite imagery reveals patterns no one saw before. Ruins long dismissed as natural formations now demand re-evaluation. Myth is beginning to blur with memory, and memory with fact. The clock is turning not forward, but back. Modern science, long a skeptic of myth, is beginning to concede what ancient people never forgot, that Earth has experienced rapid, global-scale cataclysms capable of erasing civilization. The discovery of cosmic impact craters, sudden climate shifts, and mass extinctions support what indigenous peoples have always claimed, that the past is not stable. It lurches, it resets. So the flood was not a finale, it was a fracture, one we've been recovering from ever since. And in this age, our age, when technology accelerates beyond comprehension, when control systems tighten, and when truth becomes increasingly difficult to discern, the question resurfaces, are we approaching another flood? Not of water, but of forgetfulness. Another engineered silence. The ancient warnings were not just laments. They were instructions. They tell us to remember, to rebuild, and to prepare. They speak of cycles, of watchers, of resets. They tell us that wisdom must be preserved, not in ivory towers, but in minds and myths. They remind us that we are not the pinnacle of human achievement. We are its rediscovery. If the flood was meant to erase a truth too dangerous to preserve, then every question we ask, every fragment we uncover, is an act of defiance. It is a step toward reclaiming a legacy we never should have lost. The monuments, the myths, the memories, they all speak in the same voice. The truth was buried, but not destroyed, and it waits to be heard again. Thanks for listening. This has been Ancient Forbidden Knowledge. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.